Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. And for all those audience listeners and viewers that are interested in the leadership aspect, either in a healthcare organization, private practice, entrepreneurial setting, I have Susan Drumm here, the wonderful Susan Drumm from Meritage Leadership. She's going to talk to us all about effective leadership, what she does, and how she can help the audience. Susan, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah, and briefly introduce yourself, and I'm really excited to dive into what Meritage does.
Yes, absolutely. I've been doing leadership development for over about 25 years now. So it's been a long time, 20 years with my own firm. And prior to that, I had a very eclectic background that I use in all of the leadership development programs that we've created. I went to Harvard Law School, but did not end up practicing law. But I learned a lot that I actually use in coaching, which is in law school, learn to make distinctions between different cases, why this case is not like the other. I do the same thing with mindset and making finer and finer distinctions of mindset, because mindset at the core drives action. And what I found is that managers manage actions, but leaders manage mindset. And if you can manage mindset, it is more a higher level way to help people and lead such that you're not always getting in the weeds and managing every action. Went there, then went to Boston Consulting Group, doing strategy consulting, did that for a number of years. Went to NBC Television under GE's program of Six Sigma. So I was a black belt in Six Sigma. And then 5 years after law school, I got a master's in acting from the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. And it was that experience that ultimately led me into leadership development, because I learned so much about myself, about dealing with that inner critic, about how you build empathy and deep connection. And I kept thinking, God, there's got to be a way I can bring this back to business, because some of the leaders I have worked for could use this type of training. And so it's a different flavor of it in the leadership development work that we do now. But all of those experiences play into the programs we've created.
Yeah, really interesting. And I've talked to a lot of lawyers that as a physician, if you don't practice medicine, it's considered taboo. A lot of lawyers, they do what you're doing, or they go into politics or other fields. The one question I have for you is, with Meritage, when clients come to you, what is their pain point or frustration, or what is their greatest aspiration or desire to get to work with you?
Yes. Usually it's around, how do I build a high performance team? How do I lead a high performance team? How do I scale my business, my organization, my practice when I'm challenged by people problems, right? And so at the core, it's the team not operating on all cylinders, infighting, conflict that's happening, people not taking accountability for what they need to do, having issues with delegation. I delegate, but doesn't get done. All of these are different types of ultimately leadership issues. We're here to help people really understand that leadership is a skill that's taught, and you don't come into anything that you're doing already knowing, how do I effectively lead people? And so we bring all the tools and the resources to help you do that.
For leaders that are currently leading, what is the biggest mistake or weakness that you see in today's that's hindering forward progress?
I think we're living in unprecedented times. Change is happening at a faster and faster rate. It's exponential. And the biggest issue that I see is that we as human beings get stuck in patterns, and patterns that were adopted, some of which I'll go all the way back to childhood, but the way we view the world and what we see. And because our external environment is changing so fast, those patterns aren't working anymore. And as a result, people are feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling burnout. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that you're stuck in a pattern. So at the core of everything we do is focused on pattern recognition and pattern disruption. And certainly physicians will know, as you think about when you're diagnosing something, you're looking for the pattern. right? But the same thing happens in our leadership. And that's what we look at is diagnosing what's the leadership pattern you might be stuck in. Because at the end of the day, you only have control over yourself. And if you want to influence others, your point of leverage is how you're leading.
And I love how you're talking about how leaders, they manage mindset, and you're talking about breaking old patterns to create new worlds. When you work with clients, and let's say, because typically we think of leadership as in like you're leading an organization, but in this day and age of like hybrid work, and you have Zoom, and you also have solopreneurs, how do you translate what you teach clients into running like a private practice or your own endeavor, or even entrepreneurs?
Yes, I'm part of an entrepreneur organization called EO, is Entrepreneurs Organization. It's a sister organization to YPO, if you've ever heard of Young Presidents Organization. So I'm around a lot of entrepreneurs. That's a 15,000 person, or maybe it's even more now, organization. And what we've done is taken some of the programs that we've done at some of the larger companies that I work for, like Oracle and Etsy and Microsoft, all of those, we've made it scalable for a YPO or entrepreneur to do. So an entrepreneur at any level, but we also do a lot in professional services. And it's how am I dealing with my patients, my customers, my clients? It's all that engagement. So not only is it dealing with them, but then how do I have a team that helps support me, and how do I build that team? But even if you're a solo entrepreneur, it is about how are you leading yourself? Where are you getting caught? What's getting in your way? And how do you break down these roadblocks?
Yeah. Coming back to Meritage, and talk about the different programs, if you're, for example, if you're a team or if you're an executive, and what are these different programs and how they can help benefit what you're looking for.
Yes. I love this phrase that I've heard from, I think it was Carl Jung, that until you make the unconscious conscious, you will continue to struggle, and we'll call it fate. So really understanding what is that unconscious pattern that's running you is the purpose of doing this type of work. And so in the programs that we do, we use specific assessments that help people recognize their patterns. I'll talk about some of those assessments, but usually everything starts with that, and then we build from there. So if you can think about it, one of the most powerful tools we use is understanding your leadership style. We each have a core leadership style, and we use something called the Enneagram to help people figure that out. And so you have a superpower and a liability. Now, as human beings, we think we're chameleons and we can see 360 degrees, but the reality is we cannot. We have a central vision and a peripheral vision. And where we point our focus of attention, that's what we see. And we develop a superpower of looking in a certain direction. We're really good at it, but there's something behind our head we can't see, and that's our blind spot. And in the model of the Enneagram, both working individually, really understanding what is that pattern of where you tend to look and the superpower, but what is the blind spot and how do you narrow that? And in this model, it actually shows the interrelationships between different types. So if you are building a team, what you actually want is someone who looks in the exact opposite direction of your blind spot naturally, because you can be a dynamic duo if that is the case. Now, but what can also happen is conflict can ensue. If I'm arguing it's blue and you're saying, no, it's yellow, you start to understand with this model, the interrelationship between us all and what the gifts are and how we leverage them, but also the blind spots of all of them. So as a team, it's incredibly powerful because it's not just like putting you in certain buckets, but it's showing you your connectivity and how you're each other's best friend in terms of growth. So we use assessments like this. We also do 360 assessments to get you feedback. We don't really know what our impact is. We know what our intentions are, but we don't know how it's landing on other people. And it's through 360 feedback tools that give us that. And then we also have EQ assessment tools that help you understand what information are you dialing up in the face of stress or conflict, and what information are you dialing down. And do you have an access to a range of emotions that allow you to get data that you might otherwise not pay attention to? So each of these, usually we start with some form of assessment. And typically it's the very first one is around that leadership style, because that's the core. And it's a self-assessment. It only takes 30 minutes. And if you're interested, by the way, in checking this out for yourself, you can go to enneagramapplied.com. And so that's ENNEAGRAM applied.com. And there you can get assessed, but what's most important is, how do you apply this information going forward, right? What do I need to do with it? And so we break it down for you of how you can move from the assessment all the way to a development goal for yourself. And we do the same thing with teams under a different program where if you have a team, it's a little bit like train the trainer. We'll give you the tools and materials to lead your own offsite, or if you want us to facilitate it, we can do that. But we can give you all the tools, all the content, all the videos, and get your team all assessed. So you can see where everybody shows up in that it's a diagram of a circle and where everyone is showing up. And do you have somebody looking in the exact opposite of your blind spot? And if so, how's that relationship going? And then we offer lots of follow-on work or tools, if you want, about how to bring your team to high performance.
Fascinating. The other question I have for you is, a lot of times in the corporate setting, there's this concept called executive presence. And define what executive presence is for the audience, for listeners and viewers, and how one can get that presence that they're seeking.
Yeah. So executive presence is just being present, right? But it's being present in a way that an executive would listen. And so a lot of it has to do with both your listening and communication skills. Typically, we are not really aware of how our communication is landing. So that's the piece of, we know what we're saying, but what are people hearing? And so really dialing in on understanding some of those patterns, but also, how do we listen? What information are we, like I said before, taking in, dialing up, and what information are we dialing down? We are not, unfortunately, taking in all the data that's around us. We take in a fraction of it. And so learning what that pattern is for you can help you start to increase your effectiveness around this connection with other people. Because at the end of the day, leadership is about relationships. And those relationships go with your patients as well as your team and how you build those.
The other thing is, for those aspiring, like the kind of organizational, like middle management, and they want to climb that corporate career ladder, a lot of times it's a mentor, a sponsor is usually very instrumental. So how does one go about, if they're early career or mid-career and they want to rise up the ranks? How do they seek sponsors, mentors? How do they solicit feedback and progress?
Yeah, I think mentorship is a wonderful, wonderful way to understand what is the path forward look like. And I really want to make this distinction between mentorship and coaching. Mentorship is, I've taken a certain journey, and similar that your career path might take, and let me share that with you. Coaching is very different. Coaching is, I have a process for you to discover things about yourself that are going to help you walk your own path, because your path may be different than my path. And often when we understand leadership style type, you can't just emulate. If you're a different style than me, I can't just try to be like you. You're going to have to find a different path forward. So it's a very customized form of development, coaching is, versus mentorship is, let me share what worked for me, and maybe you get lessons from that. But in terms of how you develop the mentor relationships, I actually have, it's on Meritage Leadership. If you go to blog I have two very specific blogs on this topic, looking at how to develop sponsors or mentors, specifically also targeting women, because often women haven't stepped out to develop those relationships, and really encouraging women to do that because they need them just as much as men. So part of it is look around, I would say at a high level, look around to your relationships and look at the career paths of those that you admire, that you'd love to, that you find interesting and fascinating. And then part of it is just approaching and saying, I'd love to spend time with you and see if a mentorship relationship would work. Like, usually you can't just go by, would you be my mentor? People are like, I don't know. Let's both see if this makes sense. Let's explore and have a first conversation of what this could look like. But I also think you need to detail, what do you mean by a mentor relationship? What are you looking for? Is it a monthly coffee? Is it touching base once a quarter? And what's going to fit in the other person's schedule? And I think that initial conversation of exploring what it could look like feels much more approachable than having these expectations that this person is going to devote their time to you. But there's other tips and tricks that I listed in the blog post to look at. Yeah.
Yeah. For the listeners or viewers, Susan's website and resources will be in the show notes. Another question is, how does a manager or leader navigate a changing workforce, particularly generational differences, if they're like managing a baby boomer, Gen X, millennial, Gen Z, Gen Alpha? How should they be thinking about managing these different, these values and etc.?
Yes. One is, I think, building a closer relationship. And you can't think of people as a means to your end, like not going to work, right? And so this is a living, breathing human being that has their own vision and their own desires. And what is that? So what I find where people have had the most success is understanding what motivates this person, what drives them, what type of work lights them up, that makes them want to jump out of bed in the morning, what type of work makes them want to press the snooze button. And it's not to say that every single thing and I think some misunderstandings of a younger generation believe every single thing should make you feel like you're energized to get out of the bed in the morning. Like, we all have to take out the trash, and it's not a pleasant task. But if you can orient people around what it should be, some studies say is like 70% of the time, it should feel like, yeah, this feels great. And maybe 30% of the time, it's not great, but it's got to get done. And orienting some of your staff that's younger towards this sort of 70-30. Does it feel like you're hitting the 70-30, or does it not? And perhaps if it's not, maybe this isn't the right role for you. Or if it is, or if it's not, what would you need for it to feel like 70-30? But not that it's going to be 100% of the time like joyful. And because sometimes in our challenges and the things that aren't the greatest, we develop the most. And I think as a leader, orienting people around that could be really powerful. But I think just asking the question of what drives you, what motivates you, what do you love doing, and what's been more challenging for you that maybe feels like drudgery, or maybe just is it challenge in a good way, or is it challenge in a bad way? These are the types of conversations you need to have.
How can people connect with you and learn more about Meritage and work with you?
Yes, our website is Meritage Leadership, and that's MERITAGE leadership.com. If you go under courses, you'll see where I talked about Enneagram Applied for you individually, or Leadership Edge for your team. And so there's some great resources there. I also have a podcast called The Enlightened Executive. You'll see some of that over in my personal website, which is susandrumm.com, SUSANDRUMM.com. And I also have a book about how to use the power of music and neuroscience to transform your leadership and your life. So if you love music, you can go to my personal brand site and see more about that.
Excellent. Really fascinating conversation, and I really enjoyed talking with you on leadership, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.